Good evening and welcome to our study again tonight. Let's start off within the news, and I want to give you this first one. It has to do with the UN as you're looking at that chart. The UN will sign the Pact of the Future in less than 60 days. Now, most of the times when people hear something like this, not that we hear this news on our media, social media, or any media for that matter, but most of the time when you hear something about this, it kind of gets lost in the sauce. There's a lot of jargon that goes on it. The first sentence is the one I really want you to concentrate on. It says, this September, the United Nations 79th General Assembly will host the highly anticipated Summit of the Future, where nations will sign the Pact of the Future, representing, listen to the last part, a major step toward the creation of a one world government. You can't get any more about Revelation than that. As the United Nations prepares for the 79th session of the UN General Assembly, the general public seems dangerously unaware, and they are, of the UN's plans for the Summit of the Future. That is the so-called Pact for the Future. This year's gathering is unique because of the addition of the Summit of the Future. It'll take place in New York City on the 22nd and 23rd of September. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres will shift financial resources to rapidly complete the Agenda 2030 goals set by the UN in 2015. So what does that mean? Well, the UN takes a lot of its money and just disperses it all over the place. But he's going to concentrate that money on the 2030 agenda and in a one world government push. UN has also recently announced that it plans to sign a global digital compact at the Summit of the Future. It claims the compact will help advance, open, free, secure, and human-centered digital future for all. That's economics. So they want a one-world government, and they want a global digital economic compact. This is two things that are lining up about the Antichrist, his reign. The public at large is still completely unaware of this meeting and the implications of the agreements being discussed, and they are. Economist Jeffrey Sachs recently published an op-ed on the summit, extolling the virtues of the UN's efforts. He said the world's geopolitical system is not delivering what we want or what we need. In other words, our economies around the world are failing. We need somebody to come and have one economy under one entity. Sustainable development, he says, is our declared goal. Sachs makes it perfectly clear that from his position, he's advocating for giving the UN more power to implement policies for the entire world. I'm going to give you a little bit of a prediction before I continue with this. Well, I'll give it to you at the end. One of the US-based organizations helping push this Summit of the Future propaganda is the Stimson Center. You may never have heard of them. They focus on nuclear proliferation, water management, responses to humanitarian crises, including the claimed climate crisis that the UN says is coming. The center also advises US and international institutions. The Rockefeller Foundation, another slippery foundation, has been supplying the Stimson Center with grants worth hundreds of thousands of dollars since 2020. Gates Foundation donated nearly $1 million to the center just this past year. The Stimson Center has been a consistent promoter of the Summit of the Future. In mid-July, the Stimson Center held an event titled U.S. Perspectives and Priority for the UN Summit of the Future. The outline of the gathering states, quote, the need for innovative global governance is more urgent now than ever before to enable us to control the world and its economies. Are you listening to this? It's unbelievable, and you'll never hear this anywhere. Yet it's happening right now, and it'll be coming about in September. Their goal is to declare a planetary emergency. They've been actually saying that over and over again, that there's going to be another emergency as soon as it is. The UN is going to take control so they can control the world. Listen to the quote. We therefore urge the UN General Assembly at the 2024 Summit of the Future to declare a planetary emergency, recognizing that the triple planetary crisis poses a grave risk to global stability and security, among others, to be reinforced in similar statements by bodies and agendas of the UN system, regional bodies, and national and local governments. The report recommends convening a planetary emergency platform. What are they going to put in that? Obviously, climate change and whatever crisis they have. Let me give you a little bit of a prophecy here. Simpson also noted that the work of turning the UN into a world government will continue with all future meetings, including the Second World Summit for Social Development. Beyond educating masses, we must be prepared for what's happening here. The Great Reset Agenda 2030 is now going to be the fourth industrial revolution, and it's proposed by the UN and the WEF cabal. They'll become a reality very, very soon. Let me give you a prediction. when the UN starts to get its own military force, they have their own force right now that polices the world. When it becomes more militaristic, then you're going to start seeing that this thing is a really serious threat. It is already, but most people just don't know anything about it. That is your revelation. That is the end times. Let's go a little further as I change charts. How should Christians respond to a watered-down GOP platform? Now, you won't hear this because everybody that's a Christian most of the time will back Donald Trump, and that's fine. I love Trump's policies. I'm not crazy about his personality. I love his policies. But there's some things happening in the GOP that most people don't know, and I'm going to tell it to you. You're not going to hear this on any liberal media. You won't even hear this on Fox because they'll protect it. Now that Americans have had a chance to digest the political earthquakes of the last couple of weeks, a lot of conservatives are starting to see major disappointments that, like most news, fades into the background, like when Donald Trump was shot. Even after a bombshell that Joe Biden exited the race in 2024, the mainstream media seems to be intent in returning to a thread that created big waves for the first shots ever rang out in Butler, Pennsylvania. A radically rewritten GOP platform that leaves decades of pro-life and pro-family values behind. The GOP, the Republican Party, has changed its platform. You don't know that, you didn't know that, but we need to know it. Under Trump, GOP softens abortion stance. Headlines declared. Some wondered, is the Republican Party becoming pro-choice? Others were openly critical. RNC's new abortion stance betrays GOP's founding, pro-life activist says. The New York Times went a step further, blowing the doors off of the RNC's ruthless effort to hijack the process, confiscating delegates' cell phones, refusing debate, and ultimately ramming the former president's document through without amendments. So in other words, at the Republican National Convention, people wanted to bring that up, that the platform changed. But there was a massive pressure through cell phones and people trying to do politics that never brought it up. And so it went unnoticed. For longtime conservatives, the entire fiasco felt like a deep betrayal. Not only did the party of free speech silence its own, they walked away from decades of core Republican values. At the end of the day, it's a huge mistake. Most men agreed in the convention. They're abandoning and alienating pro-life voters who turned out in 2016 because of Trump's promises on the life issue and in the court. A lot of this is being driven by the media and the polling and advisors. Politics is wicked. It's wicked all the way around. It's all about polling and getting reelected or elected. But Donald Trump's never operated that way, ever. So I don't know why he would operate that way now. I think it'd be better to stick with the base and ignore the polling. So what are Christians to believe? What are we supposed to do? Christians who were pleasantly surprised by the 45th president's commitments to the principles of life and marriage and religious freedom and human sexuality in its first term, what are we supposed to think now? Well, number one, be realistic about the parties and their candidates. No politician is perfect. No party is perfect. It never will be. Number two, speak up when leaders abandon the truth. To see a retreat in one day and not even have debate on it is wrong, and it cannot be tolerated. Ephesians 6, use it as an encouragement, reminding us there's going to be good days and there's going to be some days like July 8th, bad days. But you know what? God sits on the throne. He laughs at the nations who rage against him and say they can do it their way. God's truth is enduring. That's where we should stand, and that's where we should move our communities in this country. Number three, find a candidate that most closely aligns with your biblical values, no matter how imperfect the choices may be. Do not, and I'm going to give my own caveat here, do not say that Trump is our savior. He is not our savior. Trump is a politician right now, even though he's a businessman. He's the best, I think, right now with his platform, his policies, I should say, other than what I've just read to you. But don't think that he's our great savior who's going to bring us out of anything, because politics is a lot stickier than just having a president or a vice president. The church is always going to wrestle with the shortcomings of political candidates and parties. When push comes to shove, I still look at the GOP platform document as more aligned with my faith than the Democrats' document and what Biden has done in office. So I want to underline that. 4, refuse to disengage, even if you're frustrated. To walk away from the process because it doesn't fully line up with your values would be a grave error. It's also an error to modify or compromise or change the truth because we want to bend circumstances to achieve a political outcome. What Americans need to understand is that no matter what mistakes have been made, we've got a choice, a very sharp choice. Contrasting choice between visions and candidates. Our job is to pray, to vote, and to stand. The results belong to God. The duty to obey is ours. And let me tell you something. No matter who gets in the office, and I'd love to have a certain person in other than another one, no matter who gets in, the Bible says God promotes one and puts down another. So it's quite possible that the advance of God's prophecy will happen one way or the other. All right, let me give you something that's hit the news, and I'm sure you've seen a little bit of this. It's pretty blasphemous. The Paris Olympics. Anti-Christian Olympics herald the rise of a neo-pagan West. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit more than you've gotten on the news because I've done a lot more research on this. The entire point of the transgender Last Supper, which you're looking at, seen in Paris, was to mock Christianity and to offend Christians. As nearly everyone has seen by now, the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics featured an obscene tableau mocking Christianity with a paganized rendering of Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, featuring hypersexualized transgender performers imitating Jesus and the apostles. As if to leave no doubt about their perversity, the scene even includes a child. Amid an international public outcry from Christians, the organizers tried to remove all video footage from the segment online. And a spokesman for the International Olympic Committee issued a weak non-apology over the weekend, saying there was never any intention to show disrespect towards any religious group or belief. That is an outright lie, as I'll show you. Their intention with the opening ceremony was always to celebrate community and tolerance. And I'm tired. I've seen some of the things online, social media. I'm tired of some Christians defending this, saying that Jesus' love, he would have been there celebrating with them. Yeah, if he would have been there, he might have taken out the whip that he had, that he used to drive the money changers and the unbelievers out of God's house, and probably turned over the table. No intention to offend is what they said. The segment was titled La Seine sur la Seine. It means Last Supper on the stage of the Seine River. So it was obviously meant to be sexualized mockery of the Last Supper, as anyone who witnessed the spectacle could easily see. Even if you didn't see a thing, even if you didn't see the thing, the drag queens who participated were quite open about what they believed they were doing. Barbara Butch, the French LGBT activist who played the role of what she called Olympic Jesus is in the revolting scene, also called it the New Gay Testament in her Instagram page. In the ensuing scandal, Olympic officials disingenuously tried to say it wasn't meant to be a depiction of the Last Supper at all, but a depiction of the pagan Greek god Dionysus, who's the god of wine, by the way, and merriment, who at one point appeared as a naked blue man on a platter. Here it is. That's their view of Dionysus. Naked blue man on a platter before the transgender Last Supper. So far from quelling the outrage, the excuse just serves to underline their efforts to paganize, pervert, and mock the Christian faith. What's more, the attacks on Christianity weren't limited to this one scene. I've done a lot of digging here. The Olympic Committee replaced the cross on the spire of Les Invalides in Paris for this, an obelisk. They took the cross off a noted Christian church as part of the official poster for the 2024 Olympic Games. But it goes further. The opening ceremony in Paris also included a scene of a threesome, a decapitated Marie Antoinette, and rather explicit symbols of the occult. The whole thing was Luciferian, satanic. Then there was this. This is a rider on a pale horse. A pale rider on a pale horse, riding along the same river as part of the opening of the Olympics. It's straight out of Revelation 6:8. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name was Death, and hell followed him. Satan is laughing at mankind. He's telling us that death is coming and hell will follow. The rider on the pale horse at the Paris Olympics opening ceremony. As part of the Olympic opening ceremony, one of the acts included a gender-demeaning officer riding on a metal horse on the parade route along the Seine River. The horseman was wearing a cape printed with the flag of the International Olympic Committee. A user shared a short clip of the rider on the horse on micro-blogging platform X and wrote, "If you have any doubt what is going on with the Olympic opening ceremony, a single rider on a pale horse is straight out of the book of Revelation." And then he quoted what I just quoted you. "And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. The name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed him. And power was given unto him over the fourth part of the earth to kill with the sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with beasts." Satan is mocking mankind. He is just telling us right straight out that he's going to kill us and bring death. That's what he's doing. Why did the organizers do this? Put bluntly, they did it because they hate Jesus Christ. and they hate Christianity, which they consider their most dangerous enemy. They're quite open about it now. The opening ceremony was a message, unmistakable and clear. The European postmodern elite that Christians are not welcome in the post-Christian neo-pagan society that they are creating. The elites are saying, in effect, they have tolerance for every perversity imaginable, but none for the Christian faith. Inclusion does not include Christianity. For a long time, we called this elite liberal, but they are not really liberal because liberalism requires a degree of tolerance, even for beliefs and customs liberals find repugnant. Better to call them what they are. It's pagan or neo-pagan. Pagans, both ancient and modern, had no tolerance for Christianity. It's the greatest threat to them because it's real, and its reality exposes the falsity of their paganism, which can only be a perverse imitation to the true Christian faith. Christians must raise their voices against these elites in defense of the church. Now, the European elite who control society and are responsible for producing public semiotics and symbols are deeply offended by Jesus Christ and his church. Again, commenting over this in the weekend, Elon Musk posted on X, unless there's more bravery to stand up for what is fair and right, Christianity will perish. As Christians, we know that Christianity will never perish from the earth. Gates of hell will not prevail against it. But insofar as Musk meant that Christendom or Western civilization will perish unless Christians are brave enough to stand up for the faith that created the West, he has a point. Christians will have to rediscover the spirit of courage. The days of being left alone by powerful elites who control society are over. Europe doesn't just mock Christianity, it's also in the process of criminalizing the faith with laws and regulations designed to punish the faithful. The same sort of thing will eventually happen in America. We're about 4 or 5 years behind Europe. Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic Party's putative nominee for president, although she never got a single vote, went on record years ago as a U.S. Senator to say that any Catholic man who is a member of the Knights of Columbus, a Catholic organization, is unfit for public office. What do you think she'll do if she ever gains power in the Oval Office? In fact, we Christians can take heart. We have a long history of fighting and dying for our faith, and what's more, a faith that can overcome death. A.G.K. Chesterton wrote, Christendom has had a series of revolutions, and in each one of them, Christianity has died. Christianity has died many times, though, and risen again, for it had a God who knew the way out of the grave. And by the way, I did the research. Here's the creator of the scene, the opening scenes of the Olympic. His name is Thomas Joly. He is a Jewish gay man who hates Christianity. He made a poor apology, by the way. But you know, God's not mocked, and not only in the end times, but you don't have to even think about that. The exact same day this travesty was put on as an opening ceremony of the Olympics, this happened in Paris. Total blackout. Darkness, an Egyptian darkness took over. On the night from Saturday to Sunday, numerous photos and videos from the French capital appeared on social media. The streets of the multi-million-dollar metropolis were completely dark. Services are explaining what caused the blackout. Materials on the web show the streetlights were not working in Paris at all, and buildings didn't have power. No buildings have power, except one, which I'll share with you in a moment. According to reports in the media, the power outage occurred in many districts of Paris. The Olympics began in Paris on Friday. Thousands of athletes, journalists, and tourists were in town. The power issues appeared around midnight. The exact cause of the outage is still unknown. The only thing that stayed lit was this: the Sacre Coeur Church, the Sacred Heart Church. That's the only thing that stood lit. Along with that, this happened the same day. France's high-speed rail networks had been disrupted by what authorities labeled coordinated attacks, including arson hours before the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics. They were stranded. People were stranded everywhere. Couldn't get any place in Paris or to the Olympics. They've stranded hundreds of thousands of travelers. They come as organizers and French officials try to secure Paris as much as possible while still conducting an ambitious opening ceremony along the Seine River rather than a stadium. The consequences on the rail network are massive and serious, French Prime Minister Gabriel Attal said, expressing sympathy for those affected and the French families who had planned to travel for vacation. God will not be mocked. And basically, Paris was actually a madhouse. And I'm sure the ones that wanted to get to the stadium, a lot of them, thousands, they say, did not. So God will not be mocked. And he won't be mocked in Paris or anywhere else for that matter. Let's go on to Israel. There's some things really heating up in Israel. A rocket strike kills at least 12 in Israeli-controlled Golan Heights. And Israeli blamed Hezbollah for the strike in Israeli-controlled Golan Heights. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warned that Hezbollah will pay a heavy price for this attack, one that it has not paid so far, and it has. They've already taken out 2 of the high officials of Hezbollah yesterday and today. The deadliest attack, this was the deadliest attack on Israel civilians since the Hamas October 7th one. 20 people were 20 others were wounded, other than the ones that died, 12 that died. There's no doubt the Hezbollah crossed the red line here, and the response will reflect that. Israeli Foreign Minister Israel Katz told the Israel Channel 12, "We are nearing the moment in which we face an all-out war." Far-right members of Netanyahu's government called for a harsh response against Hezbollah. Footage aired on Israel Channel 12 showed a large blast in one of the valleys in the Druze town of Majal Shams in the Golan Heights. Now, you may not know what the Druze are. I do, because I've been there. It's a small minority group that adhere to Abraham and his teachings. They're kind of Muslim, but not really Muslim. They also have some Christian values. Very peaceful people. They're in every country in the world, believe it or not, and very small, and they will go fight. They become nationalists for that nation. So the Druze are actually Israelis, and they will fight them. They're peaceful people. This went into a schoolyard and killed 12 children. A schoolyard. They were playing soccer, and it killed 12 people. So 12 children were playing soccer when the rocket hit the field. A siren was heard seconds before the rocket hit, but there was no time to take shelter. Jian Stafad, the principal of an elementary school, told Channel 12 that 5 young students were among the dead. So Israel's been retaliating. This war is heating up. And based on that, let me give you this article that came out today. Kamala Harris is talking out of both sides of her mouth when it comes to Israel. And we do not need a president that's doing that, or a vice president, or anyone. By the way, how does she get to talk about anything? She's not been elected. She's not been elected to the presidency. Why is she starting to say things about policy? She should shut her mouth. She's not even the nominee yet. I know it seems like a shoo-in, and it might be, but she's not. So why are they giving her so much airtime? Because they're pushing her down our throats. Listen to this. Since she became the presumptive nominee of the Democratic Party for the president in the last week, backers of Vice President Kamala Harris have been doing their best to redefine her image. That had involved a considerable amount of positive spin about her past and personality, all intended to create a wave of support for the effort to defeat former President Donald Trump. It also involved a healthy dose of an almost Stalinist rewrite of history, such as their claim that President Joe Biden hadn't put her in charge of the disaster on America's southern border, which has been dutifully repeated by their cheerleaders in the mainstream corporate media. She was the border czar, whether they say it or not. The same treatment has been given to coverage of her support in 2020 for a fund that bailed out Black Lives Matter rioters and other criminals, including those guilty of violent offenses, who, when she did bail them out, raising $40 million, several of them went on to kill and murder again. Vice President believes the way to navigate the campaign is a careful effort to signal both friends of the Jewish state and those who oppose it, in that she sympathizes with both positions. You cannot do that. One of these is our ally. Another one is a known terrorist group, but she's straddling the fence. And by the way, she's not intelligent enough to even put a foot on one fence and another. These are her handlers. She's just a puppet. By championing the notion that the two sides are morally equivalent, which they're not, she made it clear that Israelis should not be counting on the United States to have its back should she prevail in November. God forbid she prevails in November. The Harris wished to accentuate her hostility to Netanyahu and the democratically elected government he leads became apparent the day before the meeting, when, along with half of the Democrats in the House and Senate, she boycotted his address to Congress. That was followed by a ritual declaration of unwavering support for Israel. How could you talk out of both sides of your mouth? They boycott Netanyahu's speech, and then she's saying that she has unwavering support for Israel. It's a big fat lie, and unfortunately, Americans are extremely gullible. Her talk of food insecurity showed that the claims of a famine in the Gaza Strip are now so thoroughly debunked that not even Harris will repeat it again, although she said it. Nor did she mention the only reason why the massive amounts of aid that have poured into Gaza since the war started with Israel and their help have not lessened Palestinian suffering, and because Hamas seizes most of the aid. Also missing was any mention of Iran, which has played a key role in fomenting the war. Unfortunately, appeasing the Islamist regime remains an article of faith among liberal Democrats like Harris. And she is the most liberal. She's the most leftist senator that we ever had. She exceeds Bernie Sanders in her liberal agenda. So granting Hamas victory, she then asserts that a deal to end the war was on the table. This is for one of the speeches she made, which would involve a complete ceasefire and then a total withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. Israel get its hostages back, but what this amounts to is the demand for return to the status quo that existed in October 6th. That represents nothing less than a formula for victory for Hamas. Harris, by saying that the United States was still committed to a path towards a two-state solution sometime in the indefinite future, is a liar. She knows it's not going to happen. Harris and the Democrats will cling to the notion, are not listening to the Palestinians. Hamas, which now commands the support of most Palestinians, almost 90%, is only interested in Israel's extinction and the genocide of Jews. They repeatedly, over and over, reject a two-state solution. They want the entire area. Palestinian Authority is similarly unprepared to recognize the legitimacy of the Jewish state, no matter where its borders are drawn. The worst element of Harris's statement, however, came at its end when she told ceasefire advocates a euphemism for the pro-Hamas mobs that gathered this week in Washington to vent their spleen at Israel and to tear down and burn American flags, as well as to the anti-Semitic mobs that have turned college campuses into no-go zones for Jews. That she said this to them: "I see you and I hear you." Are you kidding me? Like her previous statements along these lines, that's a demonstration of sympathy for those who, like Hamas, want Israel destroyed. For Harris, those who demonstrate for the destruction of Israel are not hate mongers to be despised, but very fine people who need to be assured that they are seen and they are heard. As president, Kamala Harris can be expected to continue a policy of moral equivalence, which Israel may not be completely abandoned, but it would be pressured, as it were under President Barack Obama, to endanger its people over and over again in order to appease people who want it dead. Kamala Harris is far worse than Biden, and that ought to scare every single one of you. Far worse. Speaking of Israel, were Americans listening to Netanyahu's message? What Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in his address to a joint meeting of Congress was extremely important. He gave the best possible argument for Americans to understand that Iran's fomenting of terrorist wars across the Middle East was a threat to the American society. The speech was also a brilliant defense, not only of the justness of Israel's war policy and tactics, but of the Jewish people's right to live in peace, security, and sovereignty in their ancient homeland. Timely reminders. Netanyahu had some clear political objectives in coming to America. He was eager to take advantage of the opportunity afforded him by the decision of the House Republicans to invite him and then pressure a reluctant Democratic Party majority in the Senate to go along. At no point since October 7th, terrorist attacks have had the chance to directly address the American people to explain to them the situation Israel is facing and what it hopes to accomplish without the filter of a biased corporate mainstream media. In so doing, he reminded Americans of the horrors of October 7th that have largely been forgotten in the discourse about the subsequent war that followed and the stakes for Israel in conflict with organizations like Hamas. Yeah, everybody jumped on October 7th in the main media, and then about a week later you forgot about it because Israel's at war. They forgot about it. He says their goals are the Israeli destruction and genocide of the Jews, and he's right. He also directly addressed and refuted the false charges about Israel inflicting disproportionate casualties on Palestinian civilians and causing a famine there. Both claims are nothing more than Hamas propaganda and their talking points that they have been endlessly repeating by the liberal press and accepted by the political left as truth. The address earned him numerous standing ovations from both Republicans and Democrats who were present, and doubtless played well into the national audience that turned to C-SPAN and the cable news networks that ran it live. The image Harris fears. But the fact that so many of those who should have been there stayed away can't be brushed off by the cheers for his rhetorical excellence. The most prominent of the boycotters was Vice President Kamala Harris, who chose to prioritize a campaign appearance speaking at a college sorority in Indiana. What a slap in the face. Political motivation of Harris was obvious. She's desperate to avoid being seen on television and in photographs published afterwards sitting behind Netanyahu as he spoke, as she would have been obligated to as vice president. She would have been joining in the standing ovations for appeal to the common interests and of the two allies and denunciations of their Islamic foes. Such images would have been political prison to a presidential candidate hoping to avoid the pro-Hamas mobs turning on her the way they have turned on Biden, and ludicrously labeling her as genocide Kamala. This is all political. She has no interest. The Democratic Party has no interest in your welfare. They have no interest in Israel's welfare. It's political. All they want is power. All in all, about half the Democratic caucuses in both House and the Senate stayed away, illustrating that the members of the Progressive Caucus, as opposed to even more radical House squad in both bodies, made up roughly half of those representing the party. So that should tell you something about the candidates that are vying for presidency. All right, let's go a little bit further and give you this about war. Could the U.S.-Saudi deal push nuclear weapons development? Sometime in the 1960s, Israel became the first nation in the Middle East to possess a nuclear bomb. Thanks to assistance from France, Israel created a nuclear deterrent intended to allow the fledgling nation to survive while surrounded by nations that hate its existence. 22 aggressive Arab nations were constantly at war with Israel. The only reason they didn't go full out is because Israel had a nuclear weapon. Opponents of Israel's nuclear ambitions warned that these efforts could lead to a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. However, perhaps due in part to Israel's efforts to intentionally avoid public publicity, acknowledging and flaunting its nuclear capability, that arms race never began. Yet times have changed, and a nuclear-armed Iran is now believed by many to be inevitable. Last September, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman created international headlines when he said, if Iran, his country's regional rival, manages to get a nuclear bomb, then Saudi Arabia will need one too. Saudi Arabia is currently working on a major agreement with the United States, and many analysts believe that the deal will include U.S. assistance for the Saudis in developing peaceful nuclear power. I put that word peaceful in parentheses, as they seek to reduce their dependence on oil. However, other analysts admit that the technology used for uranium enrichment produces, yes, fuel for civilian nuclear reactors, but also can result in uranium suitable for nuclear weapons. Saudi Arabia has threatened to walk away from any U.S. deal that does not allow it to enrich its own uranium. Can you imagine nations around Israel constantly having nuclear weapons? You don't think that they're not going to use them. They're going to use them. Today, many nations are rearming, and more of those arms are nuclear in nature. Jesus said, listen, that at the end of the age would be a time when man's destructive capability had grown so great that, quote, unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. Matthew 24:22. Mankind's capability to destroy all life on planet Earth only came with the development of atomic weapons at the end of World War II. And the devastating power of nuclear weapons has only grown since then. Hiroshima's big boy, the atom bomb, would be a firecracker compared to the nuclear weapons we have today. As we view our modern world today, the words Christ spoke almost 2,000 years ago become even clearer. It's all progressing. This one's under moral decay. Ancestry.com, surely you've heard of that. Blackstone and WF's genetic grab of your DNA. Again, you'll never hear this on social media or on the liberal media or in any media for that matter. There's been some recent talk about Blackstone's buying Ancestry.com for $4.7 billion. The concern with this news is that Blackstone now has access to millions of people's DNA. First of all, that's an old line I just gave you because it happened in December 2020. They bought it. $4.7 billion worth. Blackstone bought Ancestry.com. So what, Pastor Mark? Well, Blackstone Inc. Does it have any connection to the World Economic Forum, the WEF? Here's a real concern. Does this purchase of millions of digital records of people's DNA, maybe even some of yours there, have the ability to be connected to the 2030 agenda of the World Economic Forum? Well, the answer is yes. This purchase of Ancestry.com happened over 3 years ago in December of 2020. Ancestry.com, founded in 1996, is a leader in the digital subscription business and has continued to grow significantly. To date, Ancestry has more than 22 million people in the Ancestry DNA network and an extensive collection of over 20 billion records. Blackstone, the entity which purchased Ancestry.com, is involved in real estate, infrastructure, hedge funds, and insurance. As of May 2024, Blackstone manages more than $1 trillion in total assets, making it one of the largest investment firms globally. But then there's something else about this. Blackstone and BlackRock. Does Blackstone have any connection to the World Economic Forum? Well, Blackstone and BlackRock are separate entities. However, in 1988, BlackRock originally started under the umbrella of Blackstone. Now, it gets more intriguing. BlackRock signed an agreement to promote gender lens investing. Gender lens means they will focus on investing in companies that specifically have a higher representation of women on their boards and transgenders and LGBTQs and in senior management positions. This agreement ties into the World Forum's Society of Equality agenda, DEI. So the ESG agenda. World Economic Forum's ESG agenda stands for Environmental, Social, and Government, which is the beginning of a social credit score. Your social credit score will revolve around how much you follow the guidelines put in place by the powers that be. You will be scored on how you live. For example, do you drive a car, or you have decided to forego an automobile for riding a bike or using public transportation? Do you eat meat, or do you have decided to forego meat and have embraced having a diet of plant-based foods? It will all come down to how well you jump through their hoops. It's Agenda 2030. Getting back to Blackstone's purchase of Ancestry.com, does this purchase of millions of digital records of people's DNA have the ability to be connected to the agenda of the World Economic Forum and Agenda 2030? The answer is yes. Blackstone CEO Stephen Schwarzman is a member of the International Business Council of the World Economic Forum and now owns Ancestry.com. As a board member, he is critical in fulfilling the World Economic Forum's global agenda. Through its partnership with the World Bank, the United Nations, and businesses like Blackstone and BlackRock, the World Economic Forum has now access to billions of DNA records. That means it has the means to control the world's finances. Let me repeat that. That means it has the ability to control the world's finances. Again, hopefully you're thinking about Revelation and their credit scores, housing, food production, healthcare, gender equality, and education, all to fulfill its 17 areas of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Once again, another piece of the puzzle has just been put in place as the world heads towards establishing a future one world Antichrist system. The good news, though, is that Jesus also has a plan, and his plan for the future will never be stopped. That's in the news, and I hope that you understand the reason I'm giving you in the news. I'm taking stories that are on our news lines. I'm vetting them from all over the world, and I'm giving them to you as they relate to prophecy. And basically, I'm seeing it more and more. Everything's bottlenecking. Everything's coming there. We're very, very close. I've been saying that for a long time, but we're very close to Christ coming back.